If you haven't joined us for the last month, welcome to SyrupCast. My name is Daniel Bader. I'm joined by Douglas Soltis, who is enjoying his summer hiatus as much as I was. I've been traveling. You were traveling a bit, and cumulatively, for the first couple of weeks, we just kind of tried and failed to schedule, and then I think we accepted our inevitable summer doldrum fate and just said we were on vacation.
Ended up being that every day we tried to pod, you and I were both at an airport in a different city.
So, right. Once I was in New York. Once I was in, I want to say, London. Once I was in Scotland.
Yeah.
All those places were beautiful, by the way.
I was choosing between using the washroom or going through customs. True
story. So there's been a lot to kind of talk about. So let's start with the big news today. That's the Blue Jays. No,
11 in a row, son. I can't wait till they completely combust in the playoffs.
It'll be fun to watch, like it is every year. Although they'll make the playoffs this year.
I was tweeting Matt Hartley yesterday because he's doing what I was doing in late November of last year when the Raptors were acing every team in the league, tweeting things like, "What is life? Like, what is this?" And I'm like, as a fellow Toronto sports fan, I feel obligated to tell you to slow your roll and manage your expectations. Otherwise, the crushing blow is going to be more crushing. But he's like, "No, screw it. I'm on for the ride. 11 in a row."
Sure, why not?
Yeah.
So yeah, let's actually talk about the most important news of the day, which is the Galaxy Note 5, Galaxy S6 Edge Plus. They're, I would say, not that interesting from a hardware perspective. They're pretty much the Galaxy S6, but bigger, a bit more RAM. But from what Samsung's managed to do from a logistics and distribution standpoint, I think that's worth talking about. Now, the fact that they're launching this phone about a month earlier or 3 weeks earlier than they normally do, and they have enough inventory and enough of a distribution network that they're launching it 10 days after they actually announce it or not 8 days after they announce it, is astounding. So this is like Apple level stuff here. And it really speaks to the fact that Samsung is truly able to finagle and push its component manufacturers, many of whom are actually just subsidiaries of the company itself, or like itself in general, to get these parts out. And it means that the time to building these devices is getting shorter and shorter, because basically all they did was just reuse the Galaxy S6's design and put it in a larger chassis.
Yeah, well, so yeah, a lot of this won't have any effect on consumers or phone users in general, but it will have an effect on Samsung as a company's ability to make money, right? The more efficient they are with the supply chain, the more effective they are in rolling these things out, the quicker they can profit from it. I also think that with the whole just Edge thing in general, the speed with which they were able to get a new version out is partially because the initial run was kind of like a test, which then they quickly realized was more popular than what they were actually trying to sell. So they probably put a lot of effort in, like, what's the quickest mass-produced version of this device that we could get out, and maybe rather than following a regular production cycle, kind of change that midstream. But yeah, I would say it's impressive. It's interesting you're talking about the hardware not being exciting. It's hard to find hardware that is exciting, although these, I guess, could be considered exciting in levels of refinement of ideas of the types of phones that Samsung wants to make.
Yeah, it's interesting that they're not really trying to make big changes between generations of devices from a component level. The internals of the Galaxy Note 5 are largely identical is in, I mean, this is the first time that the Note has used the same processor as the S class from the previous generation, and it speaks to the fact that Samsung now owns most of its kind of hardware components cycle. They own the SoC. They make the RAM. They can make the camera module. They don't in this device, at least. There have been some S6s were shipped with the Sony sensor and some S6s shipped with the Samsung sensor, but nobody could really tell the difference in quality. They were very subtle. So it just speaks to the fact that, the only two companies on the planet making any money from mobile are the only two companies that own the supply chain and or have the influence to maneuver between it.
Yeah.
So let's.
Well, so it's interesting. So we've opened this pod up finally to Q&A successfully. We have people in here, and obviously, looking at some of the names of the people, I don't know if they're trolling, but it seems like what people are interested in with this isn't the typical phone-related hardware stuff. It's things like price and the keyboard attachment, which I don't know if that speaks to like, hey, basically you know what you're getting with a Note, and the Note is just getting better and better and better, and the Edge Plus is essentially a revision of last year's experiment, which people were kind of excited by. But yeah. Do we want to talk about the kind of change in pricing and what Samsung is thinking about pandering to enterprise?
Okay, so let's start with the price. Price is not unexpected. It's $360 or $380, depending on the carrier, on contract for the Note 5. $460 to $480 for the entry level, and by entry level I mean 32 gig S6 Edge Plus. Those are crazy prices. Those are Apple level prices. Nobody else can charge those prices. The interesting thing, though, is that as Apple's proven time and time again, you can charge $400 or $500 for a phone and have them sell in quantity. I mean, in the US, the prices are going to be a lot lower because the exchange rate has really hit commodity prices or technology prices in Canada. But, even assuming that on March 9th, when the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus increased in price, if somebody walked into a Rogers or Bell store and wanted to buy an iPhone 6, they weren't going to be scared away by an extra $80. And if they were, then they probably bought an iPhone 5S or a 5C, which are significantly cheaper.
Now, when you said that no one can charge that kind of price, do you mean no one other than Apple or no one other than Apple and Samsung?
Well, that's what I mean. Samsung has, or at least is faking the cachet that Apple does. Clearly, if they were charging $460 for a phone, the cheapest version of a phone model, with the expectation that they weren't going to sell in quantity, then they wouldn't do it. They wouldn't come to market with it here. The carriers wouldn't want it. I mean, I have a story for you. The Galaxy S6 Edge, with its $350 price, was $350 from the beginning. I mean, it debuted at that price, and I was told by Samsung and by various carriers that they could not keep them on the shelves. They were so popular that the second new stock came in, people were calling them up and buying them. On the flip side, you have a company like Motorola that just came out with the Moto G, and I was told that the carriers didn't even want to touch the more expensive 2 gigabyte and 16 gigabyte RAM and internal storage, respectively, version of the Moto G because they could not stomach spending that extra money. Now, the reason they couldn't stomach it is because every time they sell a phone for $0, that's under $500, they're making money because every time they're able to sell a $0 phone that actually costs them only $200 or $150 to buy from the dealer, and yet they're charging the same amount over 2 years as somebody who was who's buying a Galaxy S6, that's a decent amount of profit for them.
So yeah, so upping the internals only thinned the profit they would get from a reduced pricing of that device. It's like, so the two components to, you know, only so and so is able to charge these kind of prices is A, having a device that scratches that itch where you have people calling up interested and willing to pay. And I think what we saw with the Edge was, and it kind of surprised everyone, that it was something that people really wanted. But then also that you have the ability to profit on the margins of that. So that's both on the component side and like as we were just talking about, structuring it so that you're really making money from that. But then also that on the way through to the carriers that they will accept that.
Right. But at the same time, it's much like it's definitely Samsung's strategy to inundate the market and basically flood it with phones at every price point. So you can buy a Galaxy Ace 2 for nothing. You can buy a Galaxy S4 still for like $50, a Galaxy S5 for $100,
yeah,
Galaxy S6 for $200, an S6 Edge. They run the gamut in terms of device pricing, and you're getting a very similar experience with the last generation of devices. Nobody's going to confuse a Galaxy phone for like an iPhone, even though in many ways they're very similar. But
we've had commenters on your wonderful hands-on saying things like, yeah, I'm just going to stick with my Note 3. Totally happy with it still.
And that's the other issue. The other issue is the phones in your hand, in your pocket today, aren't aging as fast as they used to. If you're keeping, like, Android has a tendency to get all crufty after a few months, and you may have to do a reset. But generally, components are staying, decent longer. Their lifespans are good. My fiance has an iPhone 5 that runs really well. I've got like the LG G2 I turn on every couple of months, update it and use it for a couple of days, and it works really well. These are phones that are 2-3 years old, and you can run them like, they were brand new as long as you keep them up fairly well. So we're getting to the point now where, where Windows PCs and laptops hit in like the mid to late 2000s, where you can hold on to a computer for 5 years, and as long as you don't fuck with it too much, and as long as it doesn't get a virus, then you're pretty much okay.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So just looking here.
So I want to answer Chris's question. What's up, buddy? I hate the fact that Samsung is pandering to BlackBerry users with this really shoddily made keyboard cover. Let's talk about two things. First of all, it's not a hardware keyboard cover in the sense that it does not use Bluetooth. It has no physical means of pressing the keys other than adding a capacitive layer, which in a sense is sort of smart because it cuts down on cost. It means that it doesn't have to be powered, but it feels cheap. It looks bad. It looks like a typo. And
no. It doesn't look like it. It looks far worse. It looks like they've so I've been doing this for a while, and the first thing that I thought of when I saw that keyboard, and maybe Chris will appreciate this, is it looked like, how there was that rumor, and then they eventually proved that all those old unsold ET cartridges buried in the desert were actually there. It looks like they took the keyboard, old unsold Nokia E61, which was, back in the day, Nokia's enterprise BlackBerry competitor. They took all the keyboards from those unsold devices and then slapped it on a frame that could slide around a Samsung device. That's how bunk these things look. Bunk and cheap, and not. Why would you spend that much money on a phone and then slide that cheap thing over top of it? Well, and what does it mean to have that kind of accessory for a device where they're basically pushing the magical capabilities of a pen?
Yeah, and that's the other thing too. Obviously they're marketing this device as sort of a laptop replacement in a way. You can, take notes on it with your S Pen, and you can, write to your heart's content with this physical keyboard. And I mean, maybe I'll get it and I'll use it and like it and whatever. But aesthetically, after honing the design of the Note 5 to the point where it really cannot get any sleeker, this just feels like one of those cheap Chinese knockoff versions of an Android phone or an Android accessory that doesn't quite fit on your phone, but it was cheap, so you just bought it anyway.
Yeah, so we have talked many, many times in the past about the compromises and the hard choices that hardware manufacturers have to make to align the stars of feature, price, and design for their phones. Things like this, the keyboard attachment, are just hedges. And hedges don't often work in mobile. And it's kind of embarrassing. But maybe, I don't know. We were totally caught by surprise with the Edge. Maybe they'll sell like 3 million of them.
Well, it also, it's only for one device. It's for the Note 5. It doesn't work with any of the other phones. And maybe if it's successful, they'll come out with a whole line of shitty looking keyboard covers. But what I find really interesting is that Samsung has basically made these decisions. It says, okay, we're no longer in the game of doing replaceable covers. We don't want to make them anymore. Here's what people don't understand. Every time Samsung released a phone, they had to release a bunch of replacement covers. They had to release a bunch of replacement batteries. They had to distribute them and sell them and market them. And that was a lot of corporate brain power and time that they could have been spending creating fewer, better products. And I think,
well, no, there's two things. There's a design cost to having removable components versus a closed system. And Apple's been proving that for years. And then there's like a logistical, actual monetary cost to, as you're saying, having to manage all those extra components that go into making a device like that.
Right.
So there's two things.
But there's also the aspect of customer service, right? With a closed system, Samsung controls the entire cycle of repair, RMA, and redistribution into the market.
Yeah.
If they decide, like Apple, that your phone warrants a repair, they can then give you a brand new phone, send that one in for refurbishment, and reissue it on the secondhand market and still make money from the second purchase, right? That's the whole point. That's how Apple, it's this virtuous cycle that not a lot of people realize, that an iPhone never really dies. When it gets traded in, it either gets refurbished and put back out on the market, or if it's left in its state, many times it's scuffed and whatever, it's then just given to somebody else, like passed down to a sibling or a significant other or parent or something, and that's how it stays working until eventually it dies and you recycle it.
Never dies, only missing in action.
Well, there you go. So increasingly, Samsung needs to be able to control the entire cycle.
Well, no, it's just like, it's the reason why we don't have Moto Maker in Canada.
I don't know if that's the reason, but it's one of the...
No, but so like, because the cost of instituting that level of customization and flexibility worldwide would be the same kind of hit as having to manage the components of removable battery components, back cases, and things like that, right? It's easier to do... things are easier to manage when they're simpler.
So, on that note, simplicity is really one of the messages that Samsung is pushing with this phone. And the number of features that it typically includes in a new product has reduced by 90%. Last year, the year before, with every Note, there were a ton of new features, new UI changes. For all intents and purposes, the Note 5 doesn't have any new features. It has a couple of additions to the Air Command S Pen feature.
Yeah, the pen is
pen
like
is
reason, right?
It is, but it's not. Those aren't really big changes, right? There's something called screen capture, which allows you to scroll down through a web page and capture the entire thing and then annotate it, which is kind of neat. You can annotate PDFs directly on the device using the pen, and there are, there's a bunch of new apps that support S Pen, so you can add them to Air Command. That's cool, but every time I buy a Note device, I barely, if ever, use the S Pen after a couple of weeks.
Yeah, I don't even want to go into my thoughts on that because it's obviously just not for me, and I know people who use them that appeals to them. But we're getting a lot of mid-tier versus high-end questions in the Q&A, and I'm wondering if we can relate this back, because it is true that if they're really not new, they're just iteratively better. Is that a concern at the high end in the way that it's a concern in the mid tier? Because in the mid tier, you're always trying to hit that like offering and price matrix that, say, a company like Motorola really struggles with. Whereas at the high end, every year there are going to be people willing to drop cash for the latest best phone, even if it's not significantly better than last year's best phone. And I feel like you have to be more experimental, or it's a much greater moving target each year for what the compelling mid-range phone is going to be than at the high end, where you have these kind of flagship identities, and as long as it's iterative improvements, it works. Like with, the iPhone 6 wasn't much different than the 5S. But it still sold like hotcakes.
So I would have to disagree. So the iPhone 6 was an enormous departure from the 5S, just like the Note 5 is an enormous departure from the Note 4. But it depends how you view the significance of an entire redesign, a brand new chip, lots of small improvements rather than these large brush type of improvements. So
yeah,
I mean, the Note 5, if the Galaxy S6 hadn't come out, less than 6 months ago, the Note 5 would be a huge surprise. People would have
look at it
gone
this
crazy.
way. All of those are internal hidden things. Like, no matter what's at the mid-range, specs matter, because it could be the difference between a phone that it's too slow or just fast enough. But at the high end, even if it's a new chip or whatnot and all these new things, it's basically the experience results being, this is the fastest thing that you can get this year, even if it's not as much faster. But at the mid end, it's like, oh man, this camera component means that I can't use this phone, or this battery choice means it's just not good enough or not worth the price. Like it's that kind of thing where, like, yes, they've re-architected and done all these things, but if the end result is just like, this is the nicest, cleanest, fastest, brightest thing this year, even if it's not that much brighter, cleaner, faster, better than last year's model, it doesn't matter as much. Whereas in the mid tier, that could totally sink a device. And what we're seeing with the Moto announcements, which we didn't get a chance to talk about, and Q&A people, if you have questions from just the summer, ask them, because we haven't potted in a while. Where like it seems like Motorola, in kind of successfully nailing with the Moto G, but not quite hitting with the Moto X sales wise, is like hedging what they think this year's successful device is going to be. Like, they weren't sure which was going to be the best, so they gave two and kind of split the difference. Do you see where I'm going with that?
Yeah, but Motorola has learned quickly that it cannot compete except on price. So for value, they basically compete on value for money, and the Moto G is a great phone if you consider, and if and only if you consider its price. Whereas the Samsung, like the top of the line Samsung devices, are, the Alienware computers of Android phones.
This is exactly what I'm saying. So for Samsung, the value for money equation is very easy for a customer. It's spend the most amount of money to get the best possible fully featured AAA experience on mobile. Motorola, on the other hand, has a lot of people saying, here's the best value for this kind of price point, which is very difficult to hit for a broad section of consumers. So what they've said was, your value for price point equation might be slightly different. So here's our 1A and 1B, and hopefully half of you will like one and half of you will like the other. Go enjoy them.
Right. So what I find really interesting about Motorola this year is that it's split the Moto X into two versions. The Moto G is the same. It's a lot better than it was last year. And it's the first Moto G that I would actually go ahead and recommend to not just cheap people, but any person. So you can buy the Moto G and have a pretty good experience with it, even if you're coming from like a high-end Android phone or an iPhone. That's the first time I could say that.
Great travel phone, totally reliable. If you lost it, it wouldn't break your heart.
Exactly, and it's waterproof and whatever. So, but what I find really interesting about the Moto X Play, which is the only version coming to Canada, is that it runs essentially a mid-range chip, but it has all of the fixins to make a high, like it looks like a high-end phone, it feels like a high-end phone, but when you dig deeper, when you really start questioning Motorola's choices, you see where it's cut corners, just like you can in the Moto G. But for some reason, Motorola has been actively devaluing its Moto X brand by charging less, by having these flash sales. And by doing so, it's establishing its flagship line as a direct successor in price to the Moto G. So instead of the Moto G being way down here and the Moto X being inaccessible to Moto G buyers, it's establishing continuity and this sort of predictable brand presence where, okay, if you want to, it's like I have $400 to spend, I'll get the Moto X Play. I have $300 to spend, I'll get the high-end Moto G. I have $200, I'll get the low-end Moto G. If I have $100, I'll get the Moto E. Yes. And if I have $500 to spend, I can get the tricked-out Moto Maker version of the Moto X style, with leather trims and colored accents. But all 5 of those versions look and feel exactly the same. There's very little difference other than screen resolution and like some performance differences, but by and large, Motorola's baby is its brand. It's not necessarily the devices itself.
Yeah, totally. But as you're saying, they're kind of splitting the difference and trying to capture all the diffusions. It's like the mid-range phone and the low-end phone market is a prism, and they've got a device for every color under this broad Moto brand, where at the high end, you don't have to do that. It's just like, this is just the best. This is the best.
Right, but also...
And here's the best one with the,
But then here's the... then you look at it and you say, okay, fine. The Moto X is a $400 phone that moonlights as a $800 phone. So that's Motorola's advantage. But Samsung is charging more than any other company, but it has that brand recognition anyway. Then you have companies like LG, like HTC, and Sony that are being squeezed out of the high end by
all the companies not making money. We wrote about today, right?
By the Xiaomi's, by the OnePluses. And I have this OnePlus 2 here, and I really want to talk about it because the OnePlus 2, marketing gimmicks aside, is probably a better phone than the LG G4. Is probably a better phone than the Sony Xperia Z3 Plus. It's probably a better phone than even the Galaxy S6. And what Samsung and LG and Sony and HTC and everybody needs to worry about is that, brand recognition aside, over time there are going to be fewer and fewer reasons to spend $900 to $1,000 on a phone. especially once carriers get wind of the benefits to cutting contracts.
Okay,
like they are.
So
hang on.
Counterpoint.
Hang on. When carriers get wind of the financial incentives to cut contracts and to just charge for the phone on a financing term and then charge less for your monthly plan, not only are customers happier, accounting is simpler, and everybody wins because the carriers are not making any less money. They're just not selling the hardware with any sort of a margin, which they're already, like, those margins are so razor thin anyway that they just need to accept it and give it up. Go ahead.
The reason why the OnePlus 2 can be a better phone is because they are in no way trying to sell through the amount of devices that those other much larger companies you mentioned need to make their quarterly amounts. So for the OnePlus 2 to sell globally at a high level, would they still be able to source those components, get those deals, and sell through? Like, would the economic being able to charge more and probably profit more because they own more of the manufacturing stack? These mid-range makers don't. They are more subject to the whim of the components that are available. So sometimes, even if they want to put the next new nice thing in there, they can't get enough. The OnePlus 2 isn't looking to sell very many of anything, so they can maybe take those leftover components and put together a really nice, almost bespoke phone for people who get invites and things like this, right?
I mean, if they had, like, you know, if they were using leftover Qualcomm chips and, like, you know, no-name brand fingerprint sensors and, you know, all these things.
No. I don't necessarily mean bad components. I mean, like, hey, we're Motorola. We need to sell 20 million of these things. Oh, hey, yeah, we can't manufacture that many that fast. Sorry, can't fulfill that order. Okay, looks like we can't use that thing because if we don't sell through enough in this quarter, our company share price is going to take a major hit. We have to go with something else. Oh, hey, we're OnePlus 2. We only need 500,000 of these. We're totally fine with the amount that you're able to produce. Okay, we'll go with that. I'm not saying cheap off the shelf stuff. I'm saying like there's a reason why the two profitable mobile phone manufacturers either have amazing relationships with Foxconn or produce their own stuff. It's so that they can guarantee what they need, and at the quality they need it, and everyone else can't. But if you're only like, hey, we only want to make 5 phones, you can make the best phones in the world. It's like when Nokia used to make like $12,000 Virtu phones that were just like caked in like baby tears to, you know, lower cancer rates and things like that.
The difference is, I mean, you're missing one fundamental of manufacturing, and that's buying in bulk allows you to buy components for much less money. So Motorola,
yeah, only if they can produce that many, right?
But they can. So Motorola, in ordering, I mean, we're not talking about 20 million units, maybe with the Moto G, but Motorola can sell the Moto G for $200 because it's able to produce 20 million of them and successfully order those components, whereas yes, OnePlus is ordering them on scales much lower. And
thank you for making my point for me. So no, I'm not really sure if they would be able to order those components at the scale that Motorola would need to be. So this, like, because they are smaller and more targeted, they are able to do something that the other mid-range makers can't.
But that would increase its price. That would make the phone more expensive.
I know, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying they're successful because they're not the size of LG. They're successful because they're not the size of HTC, and they don't have 200 carriers worldwide saying, you better guarantee us X amount of devices at this price or we're not going to push it. Because they're not selling through that way, which allows them to keep the cost down because they're selling in smaller amounts.
They're selling in smaller amounts, but they're buying the components at higher prices so that so the first OnePlus, for example, was basically using off-the-shelf parts that they could buy leftover from, what it's like partner company.
And like an off-the-shelf crowdsourced OS.
It was
Cyanogen, right?
not Cyanogen, it was Oppo. So, Oppo had all these manufacturing partners. OnePlus's relationship with Oppo isn't quite known, but, basically we have the, understanding that they are in cahoots in some way. But OnePlus is still building on a scale that is 1/1000th that of Motorola, or even like Microsoft. And what you have is, if they could buy these components at prices in volumes and prices that were, say, looking like Xiaomi, like look at Xiaomi, for example. They just announced the Redmi Note 2. It's $150 for the exact same hardware as HTC's One M9 Plus, like identical hardware. But the HTC's phone is selling for 3 times the cost. So why, if that is the case, if Xiaomi, this upstart manufacturer, is able to sell the phone for $150, clearly,
well, they're a North American upstart, but I wouldn't consider them a global upstart.
Who? Xiaomi is not a North American company. Xiaomi is a Chinese company selling in China and and India and Asia.
Totally, like that's what I'm saying. I think applying a global perspective to this, I don't know if they're as upstarty as you make them out to be. They're
upstarty in the sense that they've demolished Samsung's market share in China, like single-handedly over the last 3-4 years. Anyway, we're getting a little bit like circular here, so I don't know if we're gonna.
The next step is like to bust out charts and graphs and like logistics timelines. But these are the types of things. Like it would be really interesting to see if OnePlus could do what they're doing now at a scale of a company like HTC, LG, or Motorola.
But that is their goal, and once they do that, then they should be able to charge significantly less for the same phone. That's my argument, is that once they get to that point, if they continue making phones of this quality, they should be able to charge significantly less because their buying power is significantly higher.
I agree. If they are trying to sell more of the OnePlus 3, it will be cheaper. My question would be, will it be as high quality?
Right. So that's the other thing too. The OnePlus 2 is significantly better quality than the OnePlus 1. So it just speaks to the fact that they can, avoiding all of the distribution issues that the Samsungs and Apples and LGs and HTCs of the world need to deal with, can charge direct to consumer prices that are significantly lower. It's like Expedia basically selling you a package trip for less because you don't have to go through the travel agent and pay those ridiculous fees to have a middleman. The carrier is that middleman for most people.
Or think of it this way. It's like when you get a Groupon deal that's like 70% off for like a massage at this place, but it's only for 50 people. Because if the company tried to sell it at that price point for, say, 5 million people worldwide, they would go out of business. If it's a small, controlled, promotional thing, it's the economics of it are very different than, say, HTC.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, there's probably a sine, like a
sine curve,
a sine curve that applies to this exact model that some economist has built, and it'll apply directly to this.
But and disclosure, people, we are not economists, for the love of God.
Clearly, from this podcast, we've proven that we're not economists. Well, we're pontificators. We're more. Let's be honest, we're bullshitters. The OnePlus 2 though is a really interesting phone. It's impressed me a lot in my short time with it. And what I know about the company You know, it's run like a startup. It's got, you know, it's run like a lean startup. You know, they only have like 500 employees, and they're basically taking advantage of every manufacturing opportunity in Shenzhen, but running it like a San Francisco startup, which is really interesting.
So, Sean Jackson,
What's up, Sean?
shout out Sigil Jacks, at Sigil Jacks, whatever. Shout out at Sean Jackson, wherever you are on Twitter. Not able to watch live, but thoughts on the new unlocked approach from companies like Moto spreading to Canada.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you bring up Moto, because the Moto G 3rd generation isn't sold unlocked in Canada yet, and it may not. So, you know, the strategy of selling direct to consumer is not as lucrative for some companies as we've been led to believe. So Asus, Acer, Blue, these are all companies that have avoided the carrier system completely and has gone, you know, they're selling through places like Newegg and Canada Computers and Direct Memory and whatever. But the visibility for these devices is like minimal at best. 1-2% of the population is going to be walking through these stores looking for smartphones. You know, these are the same people who go on red flag deals and try to find the best deals for like unlocked phones and laptops and tablets and whatever. So
they buy like USB flash sticks in bulk.
Yeah, exactly, for the apocalypse. You know, what I like about the movement towards unlocked phones, especially dual SIM phones, is that it understands a nascent market in Canada. It understands the market of people that travel home a lot. There are millions of Canadians who basically have 2 homes. They have Canada, and then they have their former home, and they travel all the time. I know tons of people who go back to Portugal every summer, many times, China all the time, India all the time, South Africa all the time. And they want dual SIM phones. They want to be able to just buy a cheap prepaid phone plan when they get there, and then come back to Canada and not have to worry about these things. And the market isn't going to be big ever, but it's a significant percentage of frequent travelers, and I like that there are devices for them.
Speaking of travel, you had the wonderful, super enraging opportunity to go to Alaska.
I did.
To hang out with Malamutes and like do the Iditarod or something. Do we want to talk about that a bit?
Yeah, I'm actually a professional dog sledder, and in my spare time, I race huskies. So the trip was ostensibly to show a bunch of journalists the virtues of the Microsoft ecosystem. So we got to try the Lumia 640 XL, the 5.7-inch 720p smartphone that's sold unlocked in Canada from the Microsoft store for about $350. And while it's not the best phone that I've used from Nokia, from Microsoft, from anybody, it's got a really good camera. And what better place in the world to shoot great scenic photography than in Alaska in August? So we hung out in Anchorage for a one night, and then we took a train up to a place called Whittier. We took a cruise on basically a glacier cruise where they took us around a bunch of fjords and showed us ridiculously beautiful blue glaciers. And then we went to the largest ski resort in Alaska, Alyeska. And right now it's used mainly for people who want to, who are food tourists. I didn't know about this, but there's like a world famous restaurant at the top of this hotel called the Seven Glaciers, and you take a tram ride up to the top, and you can see 7 glaciers from the restaurant, which is incredible. still, I mean, it's they're diminishing, but they're still there. And it was awesome. It was a really good trip. And then the last day, right before I came home, I got taken on a helicopter to a glacier where they're mushing dogs that train for the Iditarod. Now, mushing means that they keep them active in the off season to prevent them from, getting too lean or too fat or whatever. And they just run these dogs all day because they need to be run all day, and they get some money. So this is like a family-run business that they just set up on a glacier and just live there with the dogs all summer. It's crazy. And these dogs are seriously beautiful, like beautiful, and so friendly and so well adjusted to people.
Yeah, Malamutes are some of the friendliest dogs in the world for sure.
Oh, they're so cool. So yeah, it was a really very cool trip. But I left a day after I got back from Scotland, which I went on for a vacation. So if you have been wondering why there's been no SyrupCast, it's because I've been out of the country for 3 weeks.
Mm-hmm. And I've been in detox.
And you also, so tell us about the BlackBerry Security Summit. You did the syrup. You went back to SyrupCast Syrup Land for a couple days.
Yeah, while you were rolling over the hills of Scotland, I was caught on the Jersey Turnpike trying to get into Manhattan.
You make it sound so awful.
So I was in New York for less than 24 hours, and I swear to God, I spent 6 of it getting in and out of New York. Had one flight delayed. Was talking to Ian about it. Missed the other flight, so they put me on a later flight.
Oh, that's brutal.
Yeah, had no hotel until like midnight the night I got in, and then went to a BlackBerry Security Summit, which, for as confused as the messaging was and always has been for the company now known as BlackBerry, it was clear that they were you with effort, which BlackBerry has come in a security portfolio that could be compelling to a wide variety of companies in different verticals. There was absolutely no talk of hardware, no matter what any journalist for Reuters or some other national publication might think is the case. It was purely a security-focused event. And
they're not going to have a germ-free phone later this year?
Hey, it's hard for those daily papers. We're hiring away all their talent, so I don't know who they're sending, but yeah, and that's it's the live by the Chen going off script, die by the Chen going off script, and that kind of came up during the summit, where he both referenced the recent car hack stories that had come out, without bringing up that those cars run off of QNX.
Right.
At least one of them. And then at the end of the event, totally stole the closing keynote to say a few things and introduce someone else to finish it. It was just it's like it was all the right information in the exact wrong order. But the information was good. They have a great security portfolio. They've acquired some really smart companies that kind of round out the core security. They have a plan to make that work in the health space and the IoT space broadly. And they didn't talk a lot about cars, actually, but I think just because that's an ongoing thing in the messaging space and things like that. And that's honestly where it seems like the revenue focus of the company is right now, and probably where it should be, because it's enterprise communication of information was always BlackBerry's strong point, whether or not it's tied to hardware, and that it's easy to see why they're kind of doubling down on it now.
So obviously at a security summit, they're not talking much hardware. the ostensibly,
There was an analyst flown
vulnerabilities.
in from like Paris who was like, or from France or something, was just like, anything, any phones, and just any you want to talk at all.
I mean, it's
Like
it's such low hanging fruit, right? And what we find on our site is that we can talk to the end of the earth about we can tell that Bez story so much with so much detail, and BlackBerry is willing to talk about it so much more than they ever have been. Not to mention the fact that Bez as a product is a lot more interesting now that it is, both an MDM and on-site, like a cloud-based MDM and on-site, whatever it's called, device management system.
Yeah, MDM, mobile device management. Yeah, so like, but it's actually like internationally compelling right now when they're talking about two of the companies that they've acquired at a government level, because BlackBerry is all about regulated industries, right? So that's like healthcare, government, and finance. I think is the third, the holy trinity, as I called in the piece. When it comes to one of their companies basically blowing up because Germany wants to use them because they don't want the U.S. spying on Angela Merkel's phone calls anymore, and when the other company goes global with its what's the way to describe emergency communication services platform in Canada following the shooting at Parliament Hill, like this isn't just like boring old don't get malware on your phone. This isn't even Sony hack. This is like crucial infrastructure and the functionings of the highest like power structures in the world. So like that could be a really sexy story. And some of the people at the companies that they've acquired when they got on stage could speak to it in a compelling way. But even BlackBerry admitted during the event, like, we're figuring out how to message and package this stuff together now that we're ready to sell it. And that, I swear to God, is something BlackBerry and Research in Motion has never, ever, 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 ever done well, ever.
They're still not really doing it well.
No. So, but yeah. So
trying.
the expectation, yeah. So the expectation that they could somehow do it, like, I don't know. Maybe all the new people that they've brought on and hired in New York will be able to do that for them. But based on the event, like, they're still, these aren't easy things to sell or package in a way that a phone could and should be.
So is BlackBerry still a Canadian company? I mean, I think I say that every time we talk about this, but more and more I feel like that's not the case.
I would say all signs point to no.
And from what you know,
not in any significant way,
because a lot of when you worked at BlackBerry, and do your disclosure, when did you work there between?
2009, 2011.
So 4 years ago, most of the people that you knew there are no longer at the company, correct?
Well, more than half the people at the company aren't at the company anymore from that time.
Right.
They laid off like 7,000 people in like 1 year. I left before then. But yeah, so there are still some people that I know that they're great. But what you've seen is at an executive and even a director level, they have either been transitioned to New York, or the new people that have been brought in are either in New York or the Valley. So there isn't. There's still a Waterloo contingent. Yes, they were a 20 building campus in KW. Now they're like a 2 or 3 building campus. All those buildings have gone back to, University of Waterloo or other initiatives. We've actually covered the Accelerator Center. On BetaKit, just bought, I think, one of the a floor on one of the buildings I used to work in, or across the street from where I used to work, and they're filling it with Kitchener-Waterloo startups. But the decisions of BlackBerry's future aren't being made in Kitchener-Waterloo or Canada anymore.
What's really interesting is that it appears the placement of a company's executive team is becoming, or has become, increasingly more important. For example, TELUS's CEO actually was forced to resign this week or last week because of his inability to move out west. So Joe Natale is leaving the company at the end of the year because the board of directors at TELUS requires that the CEO live in Vancouver. And Darren Entwistle, who was the executive director of the board after giving up his CEO position in 2014, is coming back to be CEO. But what I found is that when a company is as global as BlackBerry is, with the foundations it has in Canada,
yes,
the fact that not a single, or at least very few of its executive team live with the engineers, live with the marketing people, live with the...
Well, no, all the marketing people in New York now, they've completely gutted. That's all being run out of New York. There are still people in Kitchener-Waterloo, but that's all being, they completely replaced that. PR and communications is being run out of New York. If we wanted to go team by team, I would have to get out my flow chart and pick it up. But yeah, there's no, they are still a global company, a global brand, but that brand identity isn't coming from Canada anymore.
And that's what I find a little bit disconcerting, especially given the vehemence for which many BlackBerry fans defend the company on a patriotic level. I think people both have to give up BlackBerry's not going to give up in the hardware game anytime soon, but they basically lost the hardware battle. But when it comes to actually identifying BlackBerry as a Canadian company, it's becoming increasingly difficult to do that.
Well, yeah, and I think we might reach a point, and I think we can. I don't know. It's the type of thing where it's is Roots still a Canadian company? Is like Bombardier is, right? But
does it even matter? I mean, that's another question.
Yeah, in a global, the fact that it was started here and grew up here and then becomes a global thing. Drake's worldwide as much as he reps the six. At a certain point, it'd be great if they could be fully headquartered out of Kitchener-Waterloo and stuff. But I feel like the conditions for them to do that. Kitchener-Waterloo is blowing up as a place with great engineering talent, and that story has been there for a while. And you're seeing all these Canadian startups, the forest fire that was RIM burning seeded the ground for a lot of new growth. But even those young, hot startups, when they're looking for sales talent and when they're looking for marketing talent, they don't look to Kitchener-Waterloo. They don't look to Toronto. They look to New York and the Valley. So maybe to be a global company at that level, you can never really have a significant component there.
I guess so. A lot of the best communications companies live out of New York and San Francisco. So, and they, America is, from a security and from a revenue perspective, the U.S. has disappointed BlackBerry for the last few quarters. But when Indonesia and EMEA was making up the difference in revenue, that was okay. But now, Indonesia is not, and Nigeria and those places are not pulling in the kinds of regional revenue for BlackBerry that they used to. That's, I think, why they're doubling down on North America and the U.S. in particular again. Because really, other than places like China, where BlackBerry is not really welcome,
I think it's more because they have easier access to regulated industries here.
Well, that's the other. That's true of every company, right? The government spends more in the U.S. on development from a military and defense perspective than any other country outside of pretty much China. And as I said, China and BlackBerry don't really get along. So,
well, no, and you just saw, I think we wrote about last week, was it Pakistan that was basically we're, for security reasons, we're killing all public sector BES access because basically BlackBerry won't give up or won't or can't, because of the way it's the infrastructure is built, give up access. So,
and I mean, it's good that BlackBerry's sticking to its guns there, because they've disappointed a lot of people by agreeing to let law enforcement in India, Pakistan, and many other countries, get into their system.
I might be behind on it, but I feel like in most instances they've not conceded that, and that's why they're being kicked out.
No, they've certainly denied access more times than they've allowed it, but there were times when they allowed law enforcement to access pins of, I believe, suspected terrorists in India. And they arranged because India, remember, India threatened to block BlackBerry's biz network from the country unless they did that.
Yeah, that's a little different. That's like almost at a carrier level request for specific information versus obviously what Pakistan wants is a backdoor through the whole system, right?
Yeah, they want they basically want a Prism-like solution.
Yeah.
Which is understandable, because if something like Prism was happening in the US, Canada, and the UK, it's definitely going to be plausible for it to be happening in more dictatorial countries like Pakistan and India,
where the technology was first implemented. That's now being brought back home. Yeah.
So,
but that's a different podcast. That's our mobile infosec.
Yeah.
I'd love to get Braga back on.
I'd love to get the guy behind infosec Taylor Swift.
Oh man,
on a show.
You mean Taylor Swift?
Of course.
That's her. That's actually her.
Obviously, Taylor Swift is the genius behind infosec Taylor Swift.
When she's not freaking out about Ryan Adams covers of her album, she's reading heavy on the latest infosec.
Taylor Swift, just as a tidbit, was also the genius behind Horse ebooks. So
no, that was don't genius. That was a BuzzFeed. I remember that press conference. That was dumb.
What are you talking about? No, Horse ebooks was there were two people actually behind it.
Yeah, and it was like a journalist did it as an experiment.
They weren't journalists, were they?
Yeah, there was like a BuzzFeed writer or a Mashable writer or something. Yeah.
No, you're thinking of fake Steve Jobs.
No. Okay, well, we're so off track now. Is there any other questions?
Okay, so yeah, let's go back to let's circle back to the beginning before we end. So Chris Parsons asked, "Is the Samsung YouTube live streaming thing exclusive to Samsung?" Yes, it's a part of Samsung's camera app. It's one of the modes that you download, and basically all it does is it just taps into YouTube's live streaming API. So what you do is you sign into a YouTube account, and due to limitations of the API, you have to wait 30 seconds for it to begin broadcasting. Samsung claims this is giving you time to set up your camera, put on some pants, and generally just like become a more presentable human being before you live cast to the world. But once you start broadcasting, you get a shareable link, and then you can post it on the internet, and it just links to a YouTube page. So it's not Periscope, it's not a Meerkat competitor, it's actually just YouTube live streaming, but directly from your Samsung phone, which is actually a lot less. I thought it when I heard about this, I thought it was going to be a closed system, but it's basically just a really cool feature that happens to only be accessible through a Samsung app.
Yeah, which YouTube is happy about because they're really behind in social and being attacked on video.
Totally. And I mean, I love Periscope, but the fact that you have to put your phone into portrait mode to Periscope is absurd. By the way, follow Mobile Syrup on Periscope if you haven't already.
Yeah. For the latest unboxings and what we're eating at lunch.
Shout out Igor, by the way, 1 hour and 5 minutes into the pod, for having his first live on air TV interview today with CTV talking about Uber. Dude killed it. And congratulations.
Birthday cake.
We popped his cherry and we gave him somebody else's birthday cake. It wasn't his birthday. So
is the fingerprint scanner on the Note 5 upgraded the same way as the S6?
It's the same sensor. It's the exact same hardware. Um, has there been any further word about a Canadian release date for the Moto X Play? I'm hearing August 25th. That may change. It may be later in the month or early September, but right now I'm hearing about August 25th. Let's continue.
Evan Hindra, the Lenovo stance when it comes to selling things being value first,
Don't
having
think that's a
experienced a
question.
wide variety of Lenovo products, I would say that that is not true.
And yeah, I mean, basically the Moto X Play, which I haven't really talked about, is a really nice phone, and I've put it up in terms of camera against the Galaxy S6, and it competes. I mean, it's got a 21 megapixel camera, f2.0 lens. The optics aren't quite as good, and the ISP is much better on the Samsung phone, so you get cleaner shots, better low light. It's the thing about Samsung phone and the Galaxy S6 and the G4 from LG is that they're far more intelligent at choosing how to expose a scene. That's really been an issue with phones. They don't know where to focus. They don't have accurate or dependable focus. And in anything other than like perfect sunlight, it just does not know how to expose it. The Moto X Play still exposes things badly in many cases. It chooses a much lower shutter speed than it needs to in many cases as well. So a lot of these things can likely be fixed via software updates, but Motorola released a software update for the original Moto X to fix, ostensibly quote unquote fix its camera. They did the same for the Moto X second gen. Nothing really changed. The cameras themselves were still pretty bad. We're starting at a much better level here with the Moto X Play. The optics, the lens, the entire ecosystem is a much more friendly place for Android phones and cameras, but it's not as good as a Galaxy S6. But really, like, it's a $400 phone. It's not really trying to be. So anybody who buys the Moto X Play, they're going to be pretty happy with the camera performance.
Yeah, and just having another Android phone with a solid camera is like a blessing. Hashtag blessed.
I do. I mean, it's really like it's not hard to buy an Android phone with a decent camera today. 2015, we did get lucky with the fact that there were a bunch of really great cameras on phones that aren't that expensive. So even the Moto G has a decent camera, and that's like $230.
I think we're gonna have to do end of summer shootout.
Oh, I've already started. It just takes a long time to put it all together.
Well, when you're shooting out by yourself, you're just shooting off. It's not even a shootout.
You're right. I'm shooting blanks.
Overexposed.
TMI. That is, I think, it for today, right?
Did we pod? Is that how one pods?
That's how one pods. I forget if that's how you do it, but I think at 70 minutes, we've exhausted all possible topics. We'll be back next week. There are tons of things I want to talk about. Apple news, you're going to have to deal with it. It's going to be Apple season soon in more ways than one. There's going to be tons of Apple news over the next few weeks. I'll be reviewing iOS 9. I have a ton of things I want to say. As this iVerge person representing Mobile Syrup, I have to be honest. So
you're talking about the Verge, that movie and entertainment website?
The one that raised $200 million from Comcast.
Raised? Yeah. Shout outs Jeff Broussard. Change your avatar back, buddy. It's just not the same.
And shout outs Nate. Thanks for tuning in. Shout outs Chris. Shout outs Scott, Evan. Thanks for being on the pod, asking great questions. Next week, tell your friends, tell your wife, tell your kids, and we'll see you next week.
Pod your kids, pod your wife.